Hey, it's Mo Egger. If you and your buddies are looking for a place to watch the playoffs, how about Long Neck Sports Grill? 3 locations in Northern Kentucky, Wilder, Hebron, and Richwood. There are 4K TVs all over the place, and at Long Necks, the sound is on for every big game. No place has a better beer selection, and I'm telling you, if you haven't tried Long Neck's wings, you're missing out. What are you waiting for? Swing by Long Neck Sports Grill to watch the playoffs. Long Neck Sports Grill. Stay late. Come often. We do this every single week. We talk injuries, and, for the most part, obviously, over the last few months, NFL injuries with one of the experts from OrthoCincy Orthopedics and Sports Medicine. And, the great thing about OrthoCincy is there are specialists and locations all over the tri-state offering walk-in orthopedic urgent care. At 5 tri-state locations, they have extended evening and weekend hours in both Edgewood and Anderson. You can learn more at orthocincy.com. That's orthocincy.com. Dr. Nick Early is with us this week. There have been a lot of conversations about DJ Reader, who's interesting. He's been a good player for a while and a guy who was going to hit free agency and maybe make a mint. And now his future, both with the Bengals and, as an NFL player, perhaps for a while, in question because of that quad tear that he suffered week 15. And so I think someone's going to sign DJ Reader. I think that the questions are, how healthy is he going to be? How effective is he going to be? And if he's not ready to go week 1, when will he be available? So let's start with the nature of the injury itself, the quad tear. What is a quad and what's its function?
Sure. So the quad, that refers to the quadriceps tendon. The muscles that come down the front of your leg, the big muscles in the front of your leg, come and all kind of form this big tendon that's at the top of your knee. And if you have an injury at that tendon, it's a pretty significant injury. You pretty much have to get that fixed if you have a significant injury there. And so obviously he's had this before on the other side as well. In terms of that being available and being able to play, the timing of it is such that it kind of varies depending on the person. It's possible. How he did last time actually kind of bodes well for, you would hope that he'd make a pretty good recovery. It can vary a little bit. It can take some time to get back to peak performance for sure. And so when you start looking at the timing, it's not that he'd not necessarily be healed, but is he going to be strong enough? Is he going to be able to perform exactly where you'd want him to? Especially going through camp and all the kind of stuff leading up to the beginning of the season. Sometimes it can just delay things a little bit in terms of how somebody's going to do.
Yeah, we focus so much on, is a guy going to be ready for week 1? And if I'm signing DJ Reader and the answer is no, I can live with that. I would have a hard time if maybe we get to weeks 4, 5, and 6 and he's still not available. So are we talking about something that, all right, it's touch and go for week 1, but he will be good to go by the time we get to the heart of the season? Or could this be an injury that lingers so deep into the season that maybe it makes sense if you're looking at a guy that plays DJ Reader's position to maybe look elsewhere?
Yeah, and I think that is the consideration is, okay, he's 29 years old now. Is he going to recover as quickly and as well as he did before? Could he be available? Yes. Will he be available at his normal performance level and when exactly? And you have to make that calculation. And it does become somewhat of a judgment call there. I think if, from my perspective, looking at it medically, you'd say, yeah, okay, you would hope he'd be able to work back in pretty early in the season. Is he going to be quite as effective? It's tough to say. And so then you look, do you need more depth? What do you need and what are you giving up if you do sign somebody back at a certain position?
Obviously, injury history is always a factor when a team decides to retain a player, cut a player, or sign a player. Is there a much bigger risk for DJ specifically after this type of injury?
To some extent, after you've had a major injury like that, you are at an increased risk of other problems. Like I said, he's done really well. And most of the time, it's not common to have a recurrence of this type of injury. As I said, he's a little bit older than the last time he had any kind of major injury to his knee. And, there's always a risk of each time you have an injury and as you're aging and your performance levels just naturally starting to decrease a little bit, that it could be a little bit more difficult. You could be more likely to have some difficulties with healing or recovery. But it would be something that I would really be, hopeful that he would be able to make a good recovery and at least play some meaningful football ahead of him.
Obviously, we're closing in on the Super Bowl next week. There is one significant injury in the aftermath of the conference championship games, and the Kansas City Chiefs are dealing with it. Charles Omenihu, defensive lineman, who had a great game up until the point that he got hurt against Baltimore, then suffers a knee injury. He leaves, and I'm watching the post-game coverage, and I saw him say, look, I'm going to be good to go. I'll be fine. And then the next day, not only is he ruled out for the game, but he's got an ACL tear, and you don't know about his availability for week one. And so I always take it with a grain of salt when the athlete himself swears or herself swears off, any concerns about the injury keeping them from being available. Do you think what we heard was just player speak, or was it just a little bit too soon to diagnose this specific injury?
Yeah, so sometimes with an injury like that, it's very clear right away. It's okay, right away this person's got a major injury, they're not going to be okay. And sometimes it's a little more subtle, and somebody can have an ACL injury and they can walk off the field and even, have a little swelling, feel okay, and sometimes their exam can even be a little bit confusing right away, or maybe it's just not clear cut. And, or maybe what he heard when somebody was telling him, hey, we need to get an MRI of your knee, is, well, I'm probably okay, but we just need to check this out. And sometimes it is a little bit of that player speak. Obviously, they confirmed that he had the injury, so they were suspicious enough to think that he may need, something to be done. And so, so his availability will, also be somewhat in question. Most of the time, players can, at the very end of the year, can make it back towards the beginning, but obviously, many times it's delayed a little bit here and there. It just depends, if they're really where they need to be. And once again, it's kind of where you could miss some time at the beginning of camp or whatever. So then working back into, full-time playing is not necessarily guaranteed right away.
When an athlete suffers this type of injury, how often is it that as a doctor or a trainer, you can run out there, take a look without doing any sort of deep medical examination, no MRI, nothing like that, and conclude, this is or isn't a tear?
I'll tell you a good portion of the time, just based on the history, what we see, and then examining their knee, you kind of know pretty soon that they, right away, that they've probably torn their ACL. It's something that you can usually tell from physical exam. There are times when it's not that obvious, and so sometimes it's like, well, let's check this out. And certainly there's times when you think maybe they did something and they didn't. So it does happen, but I'd say a good portion of the time, the majority of the time,
Dr. Nick Early from OrthoCincy is with us. We've been dealing right now with just nonstop cloud cover. The temperatures have warmed up a little bit, but a week and a half ago, we were in the single digits. Wind chills were dipping below zero. And yet folks like myself are still outside doing stuff. I've always wondered this. Fortunately, we don't have that many days where the temperatures are in the single digits. But when we get down to those temps where it's just bitter, brutally cold, where, you're dealing with the risk of frostbite and hypothermia and stuff like that, are there increase of, orthopedic type injuries in those extreme cold temperatures?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things to consider there. So one are injuries from cold itself, things you mentioned. So hypothermia, frostbite, those types of things from actual cold temperatures where exposure can lead to problems. And certainly when, you get down into super cold temperatures, you'll see some of that showing up. More commonly, for sure, are when we get any kind of winter precipitation, then you get snow, ice, whatever, and then you see lots of slips and falls and injuries related to that. So that definitely picks up as well. And then things you mentioned, like, if you're just outside and it's a little bit colder outside, do you see more, injuries potentially? In general, there's less injuries overall, I would say, from outdoor activities in the winter just because there's less people outside doing stuff. But, when you're outside in cold temperatures, your muscles are tighter. It's definitely a little bit you have a chance of getting injured there that isn't exactly the same as if it's 60 degrees outside.
What's worse for a highly conditioned athlete? I'm not talking about some dude like myself. A highly conditioned athlete, what brings more risks, extreme cold or extreme heat?
I think there are two different things. I think the heat is something that you can, as long as you stay hydrated, stay on top of it, you're watching people's, you're keeping them cool, you're watching their temperatures really carefully. That's something that can be managed. If it's 100 degrees outside, hydration is the most important thing, and just making sure people are not, getting exposed to heat illness. And there's a lot of things that I think we do really well to combat that. cold, definitely seems to impact people's performance a lot as well in terms of just how they're feeling, how they're moving around. I think, I think it's not necessarily that you can't perform well in cold. And generally, what happens is when somebody gets going and their body's heated up, they'll do pretty well and they won't really feel cold. Sometimes they'll need to get warmed up, and that can be the situation where it's really important, for players to stay in a locker room and get warmed up longer and make sure that they're, staying warm on the sidelines, just doing some different things to kind of maintain their body temperature, make sure they're not getting too cold. But for the most part, I think, you can manage both. They just offer a different set of problems.
All right, selfish question, because in those cold temperatures, I go out sledding with my daughter for maybe 45 minutes, maybe an hour. And when I got done, I felt like I had gone 15 rounds in the boxing ring. Aside from being old, why did I feel so sore after doing something as simple and as benign as sledding?
Yeah, so it's probably a combination of things. For one, as I mentioned, your muscles will get tight. You start when you start feeling like you're shivering or whatever, that's really your muscles contracting and you're having some tightness of the muscle. And that's going to cause some soreness just from moving around with muscles that are all tight, and also probably doing things you're not used to doing. And that's another one that gets people all the time, which is, hey, I haven't done this activity in quite some time, and I just did it, and you don't even realize that you're kind of putting yourself through some movement that you're not used to.
Yeah, I just attribute it to being old, out of shape, but I've recovered nicely. You're always so insightful. I do appreciate the time. We will do it again soon, man. Thanks so much.
All right, have a good one.
You got it. That's Dr. Nick Early from OrthoCincy.com. I say this every single week, but it bears repeating. The awesome thing about OrthoCincy is they have specialists and locations all over the tri-state, and this includes walk-in orthopedic urgent care during the week, 9A to 9P, and then on Saturdays, 9A to 1P, both Edgewood and Anderson. It's easier because you don't need an appointment, and it's cheaper than going to an ER when you have an urgent orthopedic injury. Go to OrthoCincy.com. That's OrthoCincy.com. Hey, it's Mo Egger. If you're looking for a place to watch the playoffs, you've got to stop by Long Neck Sports Grill. 3 locations in northern Kentucky, Wilder, Hebron, and Richwood. Each one of them very easy to get to. Each one of them with 4K TVs all over the place. And at Long Necks, the sound is always on for every big game. Plus, no place has a better beer selection. And if you haven't had Long Neck's wings, what are you waiting for? Long Neck Sports Grill, perfect for the playoffs. Stay late, come often.